Thank you so much to the conference organizers for having us and for accepting our paper into this session. So our paper is about the current status of archaeological practice in Guatemala. So to get started, over the past few decades, there have been some previous studies that have focused on how gender equity issues have affected archaeological practice and interpretations of the past or archaeological narratives. And some of the main issues considered include gender disparities in publications, underrepresentation of women and grants in awards, and sexual harassment. Um, but more recent studies have taken an intersectional approach and incorporate other variables such as race, ethnicity, age, and sexual orientation, which has been productive to explain the lack of diversity and inclusion by considering people's overlapping experiences and identities. But a lot of these studies have focused in North America and Europe. Um, but how does the lack of diversity affect archaeological practice and the production of knowledge in Latin American countries that have long histories of archaeological exploration and research? So our case study is the country of Guatemala, and and we use an intersectional approach to explore the current status of the participation and visibility of men and women combined with nationality, ethnicity, and occupation. Okay, so to give you a background, Guatemala is located in Central America, and it has around 5,000 archaeological sites that have attracted attention of local and international scholars since the 19th century. It was the core of the geographical region where the Maya civilization developed between 2000 before Christ all the way to 1524 during the Spanish conquest. So we have examples of famous explorers in the 19th century, such as John Lloyd Stephens, who was American and who went to Guatemala and the Yucatan with his drawer, Frederick Catherwood, who was British, and they created these beautiful illustrations of several Maya sites. Then during the 20th century, we have a lot of large archaeological research projects, mostly North American. So we have, for example, you can see here excavations by Pennsylvania Museum, University of Pennsylvania, sorry, in the sites of Tikal and Piedras Negras. And we have here actually famous Russian archaeologist Tatiana Proskuryakov. Okay, so Maya people continue to live in Guatemala, and around 40% of Guatemala's population is actually indigenous Maya. There are currently around 30 Maya languages that are spoken, and 22 of those are spoken in Guatemala alone. So ethnicity is definitely an important factor, and a factor that we cannot ignore when evaluating equity issues in Guatemalan archaeology. Okay, to talk a little about colonialism in Guatemala. Well, the Spanish conquest, the Spanish got to Guatemala in 1824, and it was actually a Spanish colony until its independence in 1821. And since then, Maya populations have been marginalized with unequal opportunities in education and economy. Guatemala also had a civil war between 1960 to 1996, and it led to the massacre of thousands of Maya people. So the aftermath of colonial racism and the ravages of the Civil War led professional archaeology to be developed mostly by mestizos, or people of European and indigenous descent. Civil War also prevented the progress towards the inclusion of Maya populations in intellectual circles. And it was also a significant obstacle for the development of a professional archaeology led by Maya people. So we definitely have low ethnic representation in archaeology, which is an issue because archaeological interpretations do impact how Native populations are perceived and can also impact national policy making. But since the 1980s, we have the Maya revitalization movement, which is a nonviolent movement and has focused on the revitalization of Maya languages, religion, and native language. How to discuss very briefly feminism in Latin America. Colonialism left a patriarchal and racist system in place. And it has been led mostly by South American countries, mostly like Chile, Argentina. And in Guatemala, we have women's vote until 1945. So the first feminist movements were for women's votes at the beginning at the 20th century. And then we got a lot of protests against domestic violence and abuse of women in the Civil War. And more recently, there have been a lot of protests in favor of legal abortion, mostly in South America, which has been led mostly by upper and middle class women. But we also see groups of indigenous and Black women protesting for their rights. As you can see here, a photo of Guatemalan women protesting for for people not to use their designs, the designs of their clothes so freely. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about professional archaeology in Guatemala. Basically, Guatemala is a pretty small country, right? So we only have 2 local universities that offer licenciatura programs since the 1970s. In case you are not familiar, a licenciatura is a degree kind of like between a bachelor's and a master's. We have a public university and a private university that offer the degrees. So the public one currently has 209 alumni and the private one only 35. This is a total number of men and professional archaeologists, right? So for 53% are men and 40% of those are women. So we do know that there has been an increase in female archaeologists through time, but the current status of equity and diversity in the field is something that has not been empirically explored, and that's what we were interested in, right? So we are basically looking at, to evaluate that equity issue and diversity, we're basically looking at publication trends using the Guatemalan Symposium's proceedings. So for participants, we quantified the number of men and women that participated in a total of 30 years. And for lead authors, we quantified the number of men and women plus the country of their academic affiliation. The lead authors were counted separately because it represents the individual in charge of writing and doing most of the research of a given study. And as such, it is an index of leadership in academic research and publication. And basically, Guatemala's annual archaeology symposium is a 5-day event, happens every year since 1981. It brings local and international scholars from all over the country, but also from Mexico, Honduras, basically everyone doing research in Guatemala, but also in the surrounding region. So it is accessible to everyone, to professionals and to students alike, and presenters have the option to include their papers in the conference proceedings. The papers are published as long as you adhere to the publication criteria. Also important is that Guatemala does not have any peer-reviewed journals in archaeology and anthropology. So local students actually have very limited access to international journals and rely heavily on the symposium proceedings as an academic open source. So given the accessibility and the fact that pretty much everyone working in Guatemala participates, we thought this was ideal to examine trends in the dissemination of knowledge through time. So we acknowledge that quantifying names, of course, has limitations, such as providing very little information on identity. So to counteract these limitations and obtain additional data, we distributed an anonymous survey to 103 Guatemalan archaeologists. And since Guatemala currently has less than 250 professional archaeologists, this is, of course, we think this is a representative number, right? A representative sample. And the survey was divided in three parts: identity, occupations, and perceptions of gender inequality and sexual harassment. So basically, this first part asked them to identify themselves in terms of gender and ethnicity. The second part asked them to list all the occupations they had held throughout their academic careers, throughout their careers in general, including archaeological projects, museum and collections, government administration, and academia. And the purpose of this second section was to identify leadership roles beyond academia, right? And then the third part asked them to focus on their perceptions of gender imbalance in Guatemalan archaeology. So we're going to look at some of the results. So you can see here, oh, sorry. So yeah, and we decided to tackle sexual harassment as well because of the alarming rates at which this is reported in academia and field work all over the world, right? So it led us to inquire on the occurrence of these issues in Guatemalan archaeology. Okay, so you can see here some of the results. So we know, for example, as you can see here, that men have consistently participated and published more in the Guatemalan symposium. So we have androcentric production of knowledge, but we see also an increase in the participation of women through time. So in the first decade, we have an average of 35% more men participating in relation to women. And the largest gap was actually 1991. But then between 2000 and 2019, there was an average of only 18% more men participating in relation to women. And the smallest gap was actually in 2011. The sad part is that in the last 3 years, we see the gender gap growing again. So we will see where this goes in the future. And then we see a similar trend for the first authors. So this data is for 2014 only, but we can see that in general, we have more men participating in comparison to women. The majority are from Guatemala, followed by the USA and Canada, then Mexico, then Europe, and then other countries like El Salvador and Honduras that are also in Central America, and Japan. We have done this for 2010 to 2016, but we intend to do it for 20 years. So we will see which trends we get. And results, sorry. So 61% of the people that answered the survey were women, and 38.8 are men, identified themselves as men. Most people were between 36 to 45 years old, followed by 26 to 35-year-old. Ethnically, you can see here that 82% self-identified as non-indigenous, followed by only 6% Maya, and the other 12% identify themselves as other categories, including Hispanic or Guatemalan. Most of the people that fill the survey, as you can see here, are students that have completed coursework but are actually working on their theses, which I call licenciatura ABD, and followed by licenciatura, which are like professional archaeologists, right? And actually, licenciatura ABDs in Guatemala comprise a significant number of researchers and employees in Guatemalan archaeology, because it takes them a few years to complete their degrees because they need to do field work and material analysis and so on. And for occupations, you can see here that we have more men more women participating as field archaeologists, but more men participating as field directors. So we do see a gap in occupation. Also, women seem to participate more or to have had more jobs in material analysis, meaning working in the lab, analyzing ceramics, or lithics and so on, and also as lab managers. Then um, we also found that it seems that museum work in Guatemala seems to be dominated mostly by women. Most of all the positions were mostly held by women, so that's also interesting. Um, and in academia, we have that women had had occupied more diverse positions, but the chairs have been mostly men. So we have men in position of power, but women are occupying jobs in academia, right? Just not as chairs or not as career directors. Um, and then the last part of the survey was about, perceptions of gender of disparities, right? So we asked them if they think there is a gender salary gap in Guatemalan archaeology. So you can see that most of them said maybe. As you can see here, no one is sure. And we actually gave them a space to expand their answers and in the survey. So some people think they got paid less than their male colleagues, but most people think that the salary gap is academic, meaning the more degrees you get, the more you get paid, right? Then we asked them, do you think there's a gender gap in managerial or direction roles in Guatemalan archaeology? Most people think yes. As you can see here. We also asked them if there is a gender gap in publications in Guatemalan archaeology. They think no, but we can see with our data that actually the answer is yes. We have a clear gap in production of knowledge and who is producing the narratives, right? Um, and the last part was about sexual harassment. So we asked them if they were aware of we asked them two questions. If they are aware of sexual harassment cases, most people said yes. When we asked them if they had been victims, most people said no. It was, again, in the space that we gave them to expand their answers, most of them said that they've heard that it happened mostly in academic settings, mostly male professors harassing women, but also male professors harassing men. Then the other instances of sexual harassment was in fieldwork settings, mostly by the local workmen harassing women and also by their colleagues, right, in the field, their archaeology colleagues. And just to conclude, so we see disparities in gender, ethnicity, and I forgot to add here also occupations. Guatemalan archaeology has been dominated mostly by non-indigenous males, and we have a dominance of androcentric narratives and production of knowledge, but we see an increase in participation of women. Hopefully, we will see an increase in Maya scholars in the future. And the factors that we account for these disparities are the historical circumstances related to colonialism and institutionalized inequality, but also gender roles. Because, for example, it's very difficult for women to, for example, to consistently do field work once they have children. We also found that Guatemala scholars are the lead publishers in the annual symposium, but international scholars are also well represented, which speaks of them fulfilling their academic responsibilities of dissemination of knowledge in the country in which they are conducting research. And we also see sexual harassment present in Guatemalan archaeology, which points to abuse of power, mostly in academic setting. So we can see that this is not something exclusive to North America nor to Europe, but it's also very much present in archaeological practice in smaller countries like Guatemala. So thank you. This is a work in progress. We, of course, welcome any comments about this. And that's it. Thank you.